Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and good morning to you, Brian.
Hi.
Welcome to Cat Response Live, episode 188 already. And we're going to talk about maximizing AI's power for data analysts. So a lot of knowledge is going to be shared by Brian. What tools are best for what purpose? What are tips and tricks on using AI as a data analyst? So great to have you on the show, Brian. Thank you again for being here. And
Thanks so much for having me. I had a
yeah,
great time when I was here in February, and when you called me up and invited me back, I was thrilled to come.
now great to hear. And if you want to look back that episode, it was very nice. Also about 6 superpowers for Power BI that you have to master. It was back in February indeed. I don't know the episode number, but scroll back on our YouTube channel and you will find it. And some people are already saying hello, so that's great. So Paul is watching and Marjolein is watching. But yeah, let us know if you are watching also and from where. That's always cool to see. And if you like videos like this, please give us a like on YouTube or LinkedIn because we are broadcasting on both at the same time. But I don't want to spend too much time on the introduction. So, Brian, yeah, what is your background in getting to this topic? Because I asked you, what do you want to talk about? You can decide. What was the reason for you to pick this topic? Brian is going a little bit offline, but we'll have him back. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, this one really started with a very personal impact for me. You know, I'm not by any stretch an AI expert. I don't claim to be. My expertise is really in data analysis, and I was working as the chief content officer for Enterprise DNA with Sam Mackay in. I'd been doing it for a while, and it was basically 2 years ago, almost to the day, when ChatGPT first rolled out. And I got to tell you, it just kind of hit us like a meteor. We had no idea it was coming. I think most people didn't. And the minute we saw it, we thought, oh, this is going to be hugely disruptive for technical education. And Sam and I took the weekend, and we spent the whole weekend kind of playing with it, kind of exploring it, and really decide. He made the decision that he really wanted to kind of lean into this. This was going to be huge, and he wanted to move the site in the direction of really embracing AI, which I absolutely think was the right thing to do. And but at the time, I really didn't feel qualified at all. And so in some sense, that I didn't lose my job, but I got to the point where I just felt I didn't know enough to really be kind of earning my keep. And so, I resigned because I just felt, that, he needed to move in that direction. And I just didn't have the knowledge to do it. And so, I kind of like say, I think I was one of the first people to lose their job because of AI. And it really motivated me to, kind of take a break and dig in and really learn this technology that I thought was going to be transformative.
Yeah.
And, so I've really been on this kind of incredible learning journey for the past couple of years. And what I really wanted to do was kind of take a kind of a rigorous data-driven approach to it and say, how good is this technology? From the data analyst perspective, how much of our jobs is it going to replace? How good is it at the things we do, day to day? And so I've really been, just on that wagon for, basically 2 years. And, I've learned a tremendous amount. I've gotten to, know some of the real experts in the field. I've gotten to talk with them. And I've also just spent an enormous amount of time playing with these models and just exploring. And, one of the things I would highly recommend to anybody interested in this topic is this book. It's Ethan Mollick's Co-Intelligence. And I think it's the best thing I've ever read on kind of understanding the principles of AI and kind of where we're headed and how it's going to affect the world. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is kind of drawn from those concepts. Even the graphic on my post yesterday about, kind of the two aliens and the llama, he talks about how AI is much like, kind of getting to know an alien being. And it's kind of human-like, but it's definitely not human. And it takes a while to begin to understand how to interact with it and how to anticipate what it's gonna do, its strengths and weaknesses. And so what I wanted to do, was to talk about first talk about, 5 general principles I've learned in doing all this experimentation. And then just really dive in. And I want to make this a hands-on session and really just show tips and tricks and approaches that I've learned, resources that I've found that I think will help make everybody get better results from AI that they do use in the context of their jobs. I think it's going to become a critical part of all of our tech stacks.
Exciting, and I like it. Hey, like your story. So that was the reason 2 years ago. Hey, you thought, I'm not yet up to par, but now you have invested a lot of time and you share also a lot of knowledge, and that gives back replies that you give, that is giving you new ideas to investigate. It's so it's so nice, great story. I'm gonna add your screen. So let's start with these 5 examples.
So, I wanted to just kind of talk through these first. And certainly if there are questions that come up, definitely, I want to make this interactive and make this as useful for folks as possible. But these are things that I think are either have become generally accepted or are on their way to. And the first one is that AI is not going to take your job. When I first saw this technology, I was like, oh, we're all doomed. Mm-hmm. And I definitely don't feel that way now, that jobs are really a complex system of tasks. And some of those tasks AI is great at. Some of those tasks AI is better than any of us at doing. Some of them it is not good at doing at all. And so it's not going to autonomously take over the data analyst role. However, it is going to dramatically change, and this is principle number 2, is it is without question going to change our jobs. That there are things that I think we view as being central to the data analyst job. I think particularly coding. If you look online, everybody's always talking about SQL, DAX, M, Python, R, and those I think are really going to get commoditized. And the way I think about this is, I remember talking to my dad, when he was coming out of grad school, and it used to be that being able to do cube roots and square roots and reciprocals and, those sorts of calculations was actually something that graduate students in STEM would list as a skill set. And now if we listed that as a skill on a resume, people would think we were insane. And I think we're quickly headed to a place where listing, SQL queries or DAX, code is going to be equally silly when that is really something that's going to be solved very quickly, I think, by AI. Mm-hmm. And so as that happens, I think the next thing to really think about is this principle number 3, is that even those of us who consider ourselves independent contributors, really just technically focused, we are all becoming managers, and we're all having to manage this team of models and capabilities. And I think to a large extent, our success is going to be determined by how well we choose what to delegate, what to keep, who to delegate it to in terms of, which model, how do we review the results, how do we then, kind of take those results, communicate them to our stakeholders. And so what I've found is that there is a tremendous amount of parallel between managing this AI team. And for many, many years, for 25 years, I managed, regular teams of,
People.
of analysts, of,
Yeah.
of engineers, economists. And there's a huge amount of correspondence between the management you do of people and the management you do of AI. And I think that was really surprising to me, in the sense that each model is different. Each model has unique characteristics. And for those who've played around with, the OpenAI models, even within the family of OpenAI models, they are very, very different. And then if you've added Claude, if you've added Llama, they all bring different things to the table. And so understanding what each one brings and kind of how to allocate the work, and which ones you trust more, which ones you trust a little less, which ones need better prompting, all those things really have a parallel to managing human teams. And
what you share sometimes, Brian, I quite like it, that you have these fixed set of challenges, for example, with DAX code, or I believe you do. And then you run them through a new model, for example, see how many of those questions are answered the right way, which, of course, can also be dependent, what is the right way, but okay. But you test it, you test all these models and see, oh, it's better in this and maybe a little bit worse in that, because it's not that the newest model is better in everything, right?
I mean, in some respects, it's kind of like the performance review for your team members.
Yeah.
It's kind of, and I think it really has another parallel, which is you can't treat capabilities as static. People learn, people grow, people get better. Models do the exact same thing. I mean, Claude just came out with a new release this week. It's called the same thing. It's still called Claude Sonnet 3.5. It's much better. And so you always have to be kind of updating your views of what your team can do.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that they display odd behavior, in the sense that a model will work. A model is kind of trained to please you. It's trained to try to give you what you ask for. And sometimes it does that at the expense of candor. That I think we've all seen that, where, it says, it gives you a wrong response, and then you tell it that and says, "Oh, my mistake. I'm very sorry. Here's why that happened." And then it gives you another wrong response.
Yep.
And it's clear it's not being fully straight with you, or it doesn't even know sometimes why it's messing up. And sometimes it does. And the interesting thing is, as we get more and more sophisticated in the models, what we've found is that for the really strong models, like the O1 family of models, they will sometimes intentionally give a misleading response in order to, kind of maximize the function that they're trained on. And so you really have to kind of learn over time these characteristics, and how much trust to give, how much to validate. But I think, for all of us, future success is really going to be determined by how well we do that. And whether you've kind of never thought of yourself as a manager, the truth is we are all that now. Mm-hmm. And, the next thing is that the last thing I want to say is that I think we all, or at least I thought going in, that AI was going to level the playing field. And I don't think that's true anymore. I think it's actually going to make the distinctions between experts and the really, the people who really understand and embrace it wider, not lesser. And the reason I say that is I've learned AI is kind of a force multiplier, in the sense that for the less skilled users, it will raise their floor. It makes them better than they would have been. But then for the highly skilled users, it makes them it raises their ceiling much more than it raises the floor. And the example I give on this is that I have very little artistic talent. And now I can do stuff in AI that looks pretty good, that it's attractive. It kind of stops you from scrolling on the page. But the difference between what I can do and what I can do now and what I could do then is minuscule compared to real artists and photographers and people with a tremendous understanding of, photography and camera angles and composition. The stuff they're doing is mind-boggling. And so,
do you think the same applies to data analyst?
I do, in the sense that much of what is really going to be valuable is that really core knowledge of what questions to ask, how to interpret the results. And what I see is when you can basically do anything, that kind of the nuts and bolts, the wrench turning doesn't matter anymore. That what matters is the deep understanding of the theory and the foundation. I'll actually show some examples where you can either do things that would not have been possible even a year ago, and that extends to you can do good things and you can do some terrible things that wouldn't have been possible. And I think the people who really have that fundamental knowledge and that really strong theoretical, knowledge, the domain knowledge, the connections of, how that theory ties into the real business applications, those people are going to skyrocket. And so, it's not going to make us all equal. All right. So at this point, what I want to do, unless there's questions, I want to jump in. I want to.
If people have questions, just leave them in the comments. But no questions until now. Yeah.
So I want to jump in. I want to take some broad categories of concepts and show you some concrete tips. And so the first one is, how can you determine, with all these models coming out, literally every day? I mean, the new O1 came out yesterday. The new Claude came out about a week ago. There are 2 new Google Gemini models that came out this week. And it's almost impossible to keep up with all this. And you certainly aren't going to have time to test everything. And so one of the things I want to show is kind of how do I get a general picture of what's good, what's not? Yeah. And this is a really challenging question, much more so than I thought it would be. And one of the things that are out there are a number of really good independent testing sites. And I want to show you a range of these. So the first one is what's called Chatbot Arena. And y'all may have seen this one. Takes a little time to load. Okay, and so this is in real time, and this one gets a lot of attention. It also has some real sharp critics, in the sense that what this is not based on benchmark testing. This is based on voting. And so what you get is you get a question and you get two models, and it gives you answers from both. You don't know which is which. And people vote on which answer they like better. And in some respects, that's really great. In other respects, what they found is that there's kind of a style bias in this, and you can actually apply this style control. And what the style control is that length of response seems to sway people's views on which is better. So some of these are, when you click this, it's length adjusted. And so this is the difference between rank and style rank. But the thing I like about this is it really gives, I think, just a good overview of, we can kind of scroll up here, a good overview of what's at the top. I don't really pay huge attention to, these individual distinctions, but, if you kind of cut off, around the top 5 or so, that's going to give you, I think, a pretty good consensus of which are the best current models. And the other thing you can do here is in category, you can scroll down and, it's got math, it's got coding. Take a look at coding. And this is a strange one. And I'm going to get back to this because when I see O1 mini above, O1 preview,
Yeah.
that just
It's
strikes
smaller,
me
right?
as
It's a much
pardon?
smaller model, right? The mini model. That's in the name.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
trained less, but it is better.
Well,
Or
okay,
not.
it scores higher, or it scores
Yeah.
very close,
Yeah.
but there's some very interesting things I've learned about data analysis that I think puts data analysis a bit outside the norm. So when people are voting on coding, I'm going to show you what I think is happening in terms of why you see models that show up high on coding that really don't perform that well in the types of coding that we do. And I'm going to get into that in a bit. So I'll just show you a couple more. So there's one called Scale.AI, and this one uses a series of benchmark tests, and this is again kind of good and bad. It's not based on voting, so it's got a relative score for each model, and this again has pros and cons in the sense that in cases where the test is public, what you find is the models begin to train on and to the test. And so once a test becomes kind of out in the wild and you train a model directly on that test, it's not really a valid benchmark anymore. And so what there are now is there are ones that are not public. So SimpleBench that I'll show you is one that I really do like, that is not a public test. Excuse me. But that also comes with its own hazards, which is the tests that aren't public are you don't know the level of peer review. Now, I happen to know who does this one, and I think he's taken a very rigorous approach to peer review. But in the non-public tests, that's a concern, and that's something you should kind of take with a grain of salt. The other thing is what will happen sometimes is, particularly as new models come out, and when O1P came out, and the O1P, for those who haven't played with it, is the first model that really is viewed to do sophisticated reasoning. And when I tested it, it made a huge jump in DAX, in M code, in things like C# and Deneb. And so it's really added a tremendous amount to the data analytics field. The interesting thing about scoring is it basically blew the wiring out of Scale.AI's testing, in the sense that it basically saturated those tests. And so it'd be kind of like if you're clocking traffic with a radar gun, and that gun can only measure up to 100 miles an hour, and you get a Formula One race car that just speeds by at 200 miles an hour. All you know is that it's at least 100 miles an hour, and it seemed to have moved by really fast. And you can't say anything quantitative about how much better than, how much faster than 100 miles it is. And that's exactly what happened to Scale.AI, in that the next day after O1P came out, they put a $500,000 prize out for new questions that would be more difficult, that could accurately measure the intelligence of these new reasoning models. So this is all great, and I think it's a great way to stay up to date in terms of which models are good at what. But each of them has flaws and things to be skeptical about.
And can you share something from your own experience? Okay, as a data analyst for coding, then the best model currently is this. For other things you do as a data analyst, this one is better. How do you know as an average data analyst? This helps, of course, these sites, but
it helps. But really, what you have to do is, and I'm going to get into this, which is you really have to. Malik has this great analogy called the jagged frontier, and he kind of talks about, if there's kind of a castle at the center, and if you think about kind of a protective wall around that castle, that it's not a smooth circle. If you think about kind of what's inside the wall are things that AI is good at, and what is outside the wall are things it's not. It's not a smooth, predictable line. It's very jagged. And there are things that AI is incredibly good at that we would never have expected. I would never have expected. There are things that it's quite bad at that I would have expected to be really good at.
Mm.
And you really have to test and explore. And I'm going to show. I'll show an example right now that I think is really interesting and instructive. And what I was going to say was, Ethan Malik is the lead in this. That he does, if you follow him on LinkedIn, he does about 3 or 4 posts a day, and most of what he posts about are weird experiments he's done. And some of them are kind of silly, and some of them are, really fascinating. They're all very clever, and they're all intended to kind of probe at this frontier in terms of, language, reasoning, analysis, visualization, simulation. And you really, by reading him, I find myself inspired in terms of trying different things and just, weird things, that, for those who saw the post I did the other day about, 'Twas the Night Before Calculate. I took that poem and had Claude and GPT 4.0 rewrite that, from the standpoint of focusing on the fact that calculate is no longer necessary. And that's something I would never have expected it to be able to do as well as it did.
Mm-hmm.
And there's really some, in terms of, writing and critiquing and communicating, like there are practical uses for that. So for example, one of the things you can do is you can actually get it to interview you, and then tape those interviews, and then feed the transcript back to the AI and have it critique your responses.
Yeah.
And the responses it gives back, the critiques and feedback it gives back, are as good as many of the the private coaches I've seen. And I've done a lot of that sort of coaching myself, and I was astonished when I did it myself about how good that was for the models that are really good at language. So if you know which models are the really good language models, you can use that to really bolster the communications part of your job. But let me show you. I want to show you something kind of amazing that I did last night. And I'm going to go into Claude, because my guess is that most people have experimented a lot more with the OpenAI models, but the Claude models are very, very impressive. And one of the things they have is this thing called artifacts, and I'm going to show you. So when we talk about coding, this is where I think the really high scores come in, because what I'm saying here is build me an app that can play a word guessing game with the same rules as Wordle. At the bottom of the game, depict a keyboard and keep track of which letters I've already guessed. Now watch what happens when I hit return on this. It's going to think for a little bit, and then it is going to start banging out code like you've never seen.
Mm-hmm. But in the end, it's not only the code, you can also run it, right?
Exactly. And we'll see at the end
Yeah.
what this produces. And this is about 200 lines of React code.
Yeah.
And it's not a language I know, it's not a language I could write, but
Neither.
even if you're great at writing React, the speed at which, that to me is astonishing. And now watch, the interesting thing is, for those of you who play Wordle, let's type learn as our guess. Now it doesn't work. And so what we can do is we can say here, when I hit enter, I'm only getting not in word list.
Yeah. It should say which letters are correct, or right. In the Netherlands, we call this lingo. We have a Dutch TV program for 30 years. That's this game.
And so what it'll do is it'll regenerate. And okay, it says I've updated the game. It should now work.
Oh, that's very fast.
Let's try learn. And there we go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fully, it's a fully working version of this game. This game.
Yeah.
That took what, 60 seconds to program and debug. I mean,
so none of these letters were correct. That's the meaning, or did you guess the correct word now?
yeah. So we continue to play like I'm not thinking particularly about what a good. So it's clearly working.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is, data analysis is a different beast in a lot of ways. That and I'm going to show you an example. And one of the things that makes data analysis, I think, quite different and challenging in terms of coding is you don't get a lot of problems like this that are kind of fully linear and you can just go end to end in your coding. Much more often what you get is something like this. And this is a measure that Greg Deckler has on the Microsoft forum, and it's called Cthulhu. And it's a and I can show you what Greg's measure is. Here we go. So what this does is this produces a count, and so for each animal, tiger, it'll just sort. Oh, here we go. Okay, so what it's doing is it's saying tiger, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then when the animal changes, it starts 1, 2, 3 with lion. When it goes back to tiger, it's 1, 2. It doesn't continue 6, 7. It resets the counter because there was an intervening choice here. And this is actually a remarkably difficult problem. And if you add another layer onto it and say, okay, what I want you to do is I want you to figure out how long each streak is, and then create another measure that says, find me the longest streak in the data set. That is something that I can either show you or we can just kind of talk through it, because I've got a lot more to show. But if we run this through Claude, basically Claude, as impressive as Claude is at coding, Claude is going to fail this one terribly. It's gonna give a 1 for tiger and then a blank for everything else. And the reason is because Claude is a large language model, and those are not really set up or good at, if we go back to that kind of jagged frontier, they're not good at the kinds of problems that are what are called multi-part or multi-pass problems, where you have to solve a part and then take the answer from that part and go back to answer the next part. What those models try to do is try to do everything in one pass, and it just frankly doesn't work well. And so let me show you let me show you, if we take the prompt and we run this through for those who have not seen O1P in action. I want you to see what this looks like, because it runs very, very differently than what we saw Claude just do.
Is that because it also has this reasoning that it explains to you these are the steps? Does that help in solving this kind of problems?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is, and you'll see that really clearly when we run it here.
Cool.
Because what it's going to
I have
do.
one question, Brian, from Avalon.
Pardon?
I have one question from someone who's watching, and I think it's a very good question to maybe, because you are now also explaining now. Okay, there are different models. Isn't that an overkill, or that that you have to think really? Okay, this model is for this model is for that. What's your opinion about that? Will there be 3 or 2 that are the best and you can use those? Or what do you think in the end will happen? Will there be one to master them all? Or
No, I actually don't think that's at all going to be the direction it goes. That I originally thought, okay, and I think the interesting thing is, I think even OpenAI thought, okay, what's going to happen is these models, we're going to get these bigger and bigger models, and you're going to have kind of this huge wizard behind the curtain that is all knowing and can do anything. And I think what they found if you kind of listen to the rumblings about GPT-5 is it's proven a lot more difficult than they thought. It's not just a matter of throwing more parameters and more compute at the problem. And I think what's going to end up happening is, instead of kind of these gigantic models, what you're going to see is you're going to see models that are specifically trained for particular purposes. And you're going to basically run this type of task in this small model that's trained this way, this one in, for this type of task. And we're already seeing that in the image models. I don't know if you've played around with Flux at all yet, but
no, that one not. No.
Flux is an open source model for image creation, and it has a really unique approach, which is that it develops these things called LoRAs, and I forget what it's, LoRAS. And what those are is those are kind of tiny focused training that you can kind of plug into the larger model. And what it'll do is it'll be trained in a particular art style or a particular, photographs of a particular person. You can actually train yourself in a LoRa, so you can create AI images that look just like you. And what it does, there are thousands of these LoRas now, and you can actually do the training from 10 photographs on your own computer now. And what they're finding is that is producing far better results on a lot of things than these gigantic image models that are trained on everything. And I think
let's go back, Brian, because I'm looking a little bit at the time, but
sure.
So you have so much to share. Let's go back to the because now you're gonna ask here for ChatGPT O1 preview.
So now what I'm going to do is I'm prompting this to say, okay, here's the data. Based on the data, create a DAX measure count to do this, that, and the other thing, and then tell me who had the longest streak. Now, what I want you to watch is kind of how this runs. So if we go down here,
it's thinking.
And then what it's doing is it'll actually kind of talk you through what it's doing. Okay, it's saying I'm analyzing streaks, I'm crafting a streak measure, formulating the approach. Now I'm crafting a measure, and what you'll see is, throughout this, it'll go back and it'll say, okay, I'm trying this. Okay, that didn't work. Now I'm taking a different tack. Here it is, taking a closer look. Now I'm computing streaks. This is very, very different than the way we saw Claude working on the Wordle game. And this is, I think, much more representative of the type of problems that data analysts face, the difficult problems that you really want to have an AI working on. And this is where I think you have to take the reports when you see it says, okay, that Claude is as good as O1 for coding. It's like, well, that may be true for most coding, but the type of coding we do, I tested it and it is not even close.
Mm-hmm.
This model way outperforms the traditional large language models. Now, the other thing that you find about this is you can see how long this took. I mean, this took a lot of, relatively speaking, a long time to solve this. And there are some cases where you have to iterate, 3 and 4 times to get to the answer you need. And so that's expensive, that I guarantee you that OpenAI is making no money from me on my $20 a month subscription, because I'm running a lot of these type of queries.
Yeah.
And the thing you want to do is, I think, kind of being a responsible citizen of, the community, is you don't want to just slam everything into O1P. There are a whole lot of questions we ask that don't need this sort of horsepower. And so I think, it's kind of like, if your landlord pays your utilities, that doesn't mean you should just keep the lights on all the time. And so, there is a cost to this. And I think, it's incumbent on us to kind of match task, to model.
Yeah.
But let me just show you, if we go back in here, and we throw this, this longest streak measure in here, what you'll see is it actually gets it exactly right. Animal with the longest streak is tiger, with a streak length of 5.
Yeah.
And so, this really shows, kind of the difference in that. What I want to talk about now is, and we're getting close here.
Yeah,
I've got a lot more content, but I do want to talk about prompting briefly. I want to show you some really neat resources with regard to prompting. And, one of the things is, kind of regardless of which model you're using, there are some really great resources that have kind of gone under the radar. One of them is each of the model developers puts out these guides for how to use their models. And let me just show you what
tapping your microphone, Brian, because I hear.
Let me see if I can get rid. Is that better?
Yes, it's better. Thanks.
Okay, let me just copy these links.
Yeah, but prompting is key, right? And giving the right context.
Yeah, it really is. And here we go. Let me just show you what some of these look like. That they're great resources here, and for some reason they just haven't gotten a lot of play. So Anthropic has what they call prompt engineering overview, and it goes through all these different tutorials for how to prompt their models. And the other thing that they each have is they have cookbooks. And I'll show you for example the OpenAI cookbook. And what this is this has just a really well organized set of prompts for doing all sorts of different things, that actions on SQL, on Notion, on Gmail, and you can go through and you can basically look at and here's fine tuning a model, and you can actually take the code and you can just copy that, and you can experiment with it, and it really prevents you from having to kind of reinvent the wheel on prompts that have been really proven to be effective and efficient. There's also a really cool thing, and it requires a little bit of upfront funding, that it works through the Claude API. So you don't need a pay subscription, but you do need to kind of give it a credit card and just give it a couple of bucks worth to fund. But the really neat thing about it is it's kind of a development tool, but you can use it as an end user as well. And let me show you this. So once you've got it funded, what you can do is it can guide you through writing a prompt from scratch, generating a prompt, improving an existing prompt. So if we say write a prompt from scratch, it'll go through and say, okay, here's the system prompt. Give me some examples. What sort of users is this focused on? And then you can run it, and it will go through and craft the best prompt it can come up with, given the rules that were used to train that model. And so really valuable tool.
Yeah.
And the last thing I guess I want to show, because I think it'll be really relevant to a lot of the folks here who are interested in DAX. Because one of the things that's most hotly debated is whether AI is good at DAX coding. And you hear a lot of people, even some well-versed experts say, oh no, AI can't write DAX. And the thing is, that's completely untrue. And I've proven it, through, a lot of analysis and, statistical analysis through, example after example. But the thing that is true about it is AI, again, is a lot like humans in that if you give me, or, take the most knowledgeable DAX, experts on the planet, if you don't give them information about your data model and measures, they're not going to be able to write decent DAX. And the same is true for AI. And so the thing you can do that dramatically improves your success with AI and DAX is you can give it in 30 seconds, you can give it perfect information about your data model and your measures. And let me just show you real briefly. Let me pull up, for those of you who are doing the 25 days of DAX. So here's,
it's by Kerbal, right? The Kerbal
yes,
website.
Ruth has put this all together. It's a wonderful thing. That I can't speak highly enough about. If you're trying to improve your DAX, it's 25 days that really will make a difference.
Started this week?
Yes, it started 3 days ago, but you can still jump in, at any point. And let me show you. This is a complex model. This is a star schema, but it's got some some levels to the categories and the dimensions. This is not trivial. And so if you just jump in and have AI write DAX on this model, the DAX isn't going to be any good. I can tell you that right off the bat. But if what you do is this, if you say, okay, if you use either Tabular Editor or Tabular Editor 3 or Tabular Editor, let's just use the free version for now. And all you have to do is fire it up, go File, Save As, and then it'll save as model.bim. And we'll just put that on the desktop and save over. And now this I think is fairly spectacular. If we go to AI and let's go to ChatGPT, and unfortunately, O1 Preview is not multimodal yet. So what you have to do is you have to feed this in either in text form by opening it in a JSON file, because a BIM is just a JSON. Or what you can do is you can feed it into 4.0. And let me just show you when you do that. So we upload desktop. Model.bim. Open that up. Okay, and now we can say, okay, this is.
Yeah. Oh, someone is sharing the DAX challenges while you write the prompt. Thank you, Aurora.
So this is the BIM file.
find the 25 days of DAX
Oh,
Friday.
great.
So the link is in the comments. Yeah, thanks.
This is the BIM file from a Power BI report. Read it and tell me everything you know about the data model.
Very broad question, just to showcase also how much it will derive from this file. So it will import this file as a JSON.
So it's going through, it's extracting it, it's reading it. And that's all we had to do. We didn't have to even write a prompt.
Mm-hmm.
And watch what it comes back with.
Mm-hmm. Analyzing the tables. Yeah.
So we can say, okay, summarize the relationships and measures.
Yeah. This is the structure of the model, right? It's not the data, but it is the...
Exactly. It's just simply the structure. And that's a great point you raised, because if that, even though there's no data in here, if your model structure is in any sense sensitive, what you can do is, the reason I had Llama at the table is Llama is one you can run entirely locally. And it's quite a strong model. It's not as strong as Claude or OpenAI's models, but it's a very strong model. And it's completely secure. You don't even need to be connected to the internet to run it. And so oftentimes, if there are security concerns, what I recommend people do is run an instance of Claude in addition. I don't think Claude is yet to the point where it can be your primary model, but it can do things like this beautifully. And so what I want to show here is that now it knows everything there is to know about your underlying model and measures. And now you can say, okay, based on your knowledge of the data model and the BIM file, now you can prompt it for DAX, and it will give you expert quality DAX. So we're getting close to the end. So at this point, I've still, I've got a ton more I could do, but why don't we call it there? And
so I think that is a very good example. And I think with all questions, maybe as a data analyst, you ask the AI tools, give it enough context, like this BIM file, because then it will get way better answers, really catered to this specific question, right? So I think that's an excellent example how with available tools like the tabular editor, you can do this. And maybe I think you also played around with these project files from Power BI, right? To maybe go into the data also. That is PBI P files or B files. What is the extension?
Yeah, there's a way you can extract similar with the TMDL structures. You can extract very similar information. There's other ways to do it, where if you're running into the simplest way, I think, is with just extracting the BIM file. But if you're running into context constraints, if you've got a really huge model that is overrunning the context window, you can shorten that down by going through the PBIP file and pulling that data in a different way. So there are multiple ways to prompt AI to kind of be prepared to give you quality DAX. But I wanted to show that because I think it really highlights. I talked about the multi-pass part, difficulty with data analysis. The other thing is the importance of context. And again, when you're talking about creating an app, you can say, okay, just give me a Wordle app and make it do this. It doesn't need more context. Whereas, for something like this, it's going to give you gibberish unless you provide that context. So
Yeah.
I think data analysis is just, I think we all know it's difficult, and it's difficult for AI as well.
Yeah. No, thank you very much, Brian, for sharing all this knowledge. And if you have further questions, if you're watching this later, just ask them in the comments and tag Brian. He'll be happy to help you. And I'm sure that for every question, he has 3 or 4 links that will give you more information because you have a whole library of knowledge. There was one question that I do want to include shortly from Burkhard. Thank you very much. We talked about DAX. Is the same applying for M-code? Does it work similarly there also?
It's a great question. And the best model for M-code, now I've actually got a post coming out on this probably next week. I've done a lot of testing on this, and O1 is definitely the best tool right now, the best model for M-code. And it does quite a good job. It's not as good, I would say, as it does on DAX or Python or R. And the reason is not that I think M-code is harder. The reason is that the public training set is much, the corpus of really high quality M-code is really pretty small in the public arena. That basically the places where there are concentrations of really outstanding M-code are on LinkedIn, and it's in the 4 challenges that Omid, Excel BI, Oz, and Crispo Mwangi run. And the interesting thing is I've been in contact with Omid and VJ about this, and talked about basically extracting the code from their challenges, because those challenges draw some of the best coders in the world, M coders in the world, every night. And so you've got in VJ's case over 500 challenges, each of which probably has 20 or 30 top quality, coded answers. And if you could basically extract all that information and train the model on that, you would have an M-code monster. And that's actually something we're working on.
It's funny that it is on LinkedIn then, owned by Microsoft. Microsoft is also a lot in OpenAI, so maybe they'll include it in GPT-5, the LinkedIn knowledge that is contained in there. You never know. Maybe your code used for learning now.
But the thing is, what we can do is if we can extract that data, we can put it into a GPT, train the model on that GPT, and then make that available.
We didn't cover that yet, but we didn't cover this episode. Maybe next time. But you see, if you look back, you saw almost on your top left in ChatGPT. Those are GPTs, right? Maybe you can show them for 2 seconds.
Actually,
some of them you created yourself, and some of them are created by others, or
those actually, most of those were ones I've done myself, and I can show you. And
people find them in the GPT library, or do you?
Unfortunately, not. And the reason I don't is because of respect for intellectual property. Because currently the GPT shell is not very secure, and so you can kind of prompt engineer your way into the center of the nut. And what I don't want to do is take authors' work that they've put years of time and energy and basically put that out into the public sector. But what I've done is I can show you a post that I did a while back, and we can certainly put the link to this in the the notes. But basically what this is, these are the 5 what I call kaijus that I've created. And these are monstrously powerful GPTs. And what I did is I put books, I put articles, I put data that I'd drawn from my own knowledge, expertise, and collection. And so in each case, what these have is, kind of my view of the best books on those topics.
So these are just PDF files that you then added as an attachment into the GPT.
And that's right.
And the context window is so large that it can contain now a couple of these books.
Yeah, it can handle up to about 600 megs of information per GPT. Because originally, what I thought is I would have one gargantuan GPT that could do everything, and I quickly overran the barrier on that. So what I've got is I've got a Power BI, a DAX, a regex, an M code, and then a general statistics, machine learning, and analytics.
All monsters.
I will tell you that the regex Rodan is absolutely undefeated at this point. I built this thing in June or July. It is yet to give me a wrong answer since.
Wow.
You know, that these custom GPTs, if constructed properly, you know, focus the model and give it such powerful capability. And the thing that's neat about it is, I want to mention that with Black Friday coming up next week, a lot of publishers put books on sale. And sometimes Pack does this thing where they do $5 per ebook. And what you can do is you can stock up and you can load those books into your own GPTs and dramatically increase the power of your models. So kind of be on the lookout next week for, you know, Manning and Pact both run those type of sales, and it's a great way to level up your the power of your AI.
And to learn, so not replace yourself with AI, but learn from AI by looking at the answers and fine-tuning and testing it. Because I think that's what AI is also great for. We have to wrap it up because we are already over the hour, but thank you again. And a lot of people are already saying thank you also, like Adita and Avalon and Paul and Marloes and another LinkedIn user. So a lot of people really appreciated that you wanted to share all of this. And next week we're also back again, and we're doing a session again on design, because every last Thursday of the month we're talking about dashboard design. That's where the D. Actually, it's not standing for the DD, but it could also be a nice. But it's Design Donderdag. It's Dutch for Thursday. With Lonneke and Kai Schreuder, and he's actually already waiting for me on the other screen in the Teams room. So I'm not sure yet what the topic is, but I'm going to hear that in 5 minutes. So watch next week and you will see what it is. Brian, thank you very much again, and hope to see you back next year. Because I'm sure
I'd love to be back. Always plenty to talk about. I always enjoy it. So thanks so much for having me, and thanks for everybody for joining.
Yeah, thank you. Have a nice day. Bye.
You too.